and then I will start to record. And we should have participants start to join. Good morning. We're just gonna give it a few minutes so that people can join. Welcome. This is a Vashon Island Chamber chat focused on today, the PPP forgiveness and the change in the rules yet again. Just give it a few minutes and we'll have people join. We have a pretty big crew of people who registered for this morning. So it's just going to take a minute. So just hang in there with us. I'm Cheryl Liebert. I'm the Vashon Chamber board president, and I'm here with Heather Russell of US Bank, and she's also a Chamber of Commerce board member and actually our treasurer. So she knows a lot about the money stuff. So looks like we have quite a few people joining. Give it a few more minutes and we'll have a few more folks join us this morning. Just some kind of rules of the webinar. We will go ahead and take questions after Heather gets a chance to go through all of the information. But if you do have questions that come up, you can certainly put them into the chat and I will ensure that we ask Heather those questions. And our goal today is to make sure that you get the answers you need for your businesses. So thank you very much for joining us this morning. We are trying to provide resources that help all our businesses thrive. So with that, Heather, I think we have a pretty good number of people on. So why don't we at this point go ahead and get started? So Heather, why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself and take it away.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Cheryl. So hello, everyone. My name is Heather Russell. I am the branch manager at the US Bank here on Vashon, as well as the treasurer of the Chamber of Commerce. And I come to you today to talk a little bit about the Paycheck Flexibility Act that got signed into law back on June 5th. And is now being enacted and basically amending the original CARES Act that introduced the PPP to all of us that are struggling business owners trying to figure out how to make business work in this crazy time of COVID. So Cheryl, if you could go ahead and move forward on the slide. So one of the bigger updates, and first off, I guess I'd like to say is that these updates are really fantastic. When they say flexibility, it really means that. They're really giving us a lot of flexibility here. I think people were a little worried because some of the original parameters were very constrictive and kind of hard to figure out how to make this actually work for your business, especially if you were having to kind of close down. So one of the first things that they did update was in terms of the percentages of the amount of your loan that you need to use on payroll costs versus the other covered expenses. So covered expenses just in general, to kind of go back to a higher view, are payroll, which is your actual gross pay, your wages and salary, as well as any sort of employer paid healthcare, and any matched retirement contributions you might make, as well as covered expenses include your rent, any sort of business loan interest. So if you happen to have an equipment loan, or if you do own commercial real estate, any interest that you're paying on that, as well as your utilities. So that kind of includes phone, internet, gas, water, electricity. So the big thing that has been updated was it used to be 75% of the loan must be used on your payroll costs, and they have lowered that to 60% of the loan must be on your payroll costs, and no more than 40% of the amount of money you got from the PPP can be used for your other covered costs like rent, loan interest, and utilities. Could we move forward? Great. So I just wanted to go over a few factors that can affect your forgiveness. You may not be 100% forgiven if you don't kind of fall into certain things. So for example, if you don't use the full 60% on payroll, your total forgivable amount would be reduced proportionally to that. And I'll go over an example of that on the next slide. As well as if you have wages that are reduced more than 25% for an employee, that also won't be forgiven. So if you had someone who was being paid $100,000 and now they're being paid less than $75,000, then the difference there wouldn't be forgiven. As well as your FTE is reduced. So FTE is your full-time equivalency, meaning if you had, and I'll also go into how to kind of calculate that out for yourself in a next slide. So as well, it would be, your forgivable amount would be proportionally reduced based on that. Now, the cool thing about the new forgiveness form, if you look on the actual SBA and the Treasury, is there is an easy, the 3508 easy form. And if you fall into certain parameters, you may be able to just do the easy as opposed to the full form, just the 3508. And one of those stipulations that they talk about is if, based on the fact that you were unable to rehire people or had to shut down based on COVID, you may be able to still be running on less FTE and have it not be counted against you, if that makes sense. So, and then the other reason that you might not get 100% forgiveness is if you received an advance from the EIDL, which is the Economic Injury Disaster Loan. It would be reduced by that amount that you got from the advance. That's the grant portion, not the portion that's the actual 30-year loan, but what was actually given to you.
Heather, do you mind? There's a couple questions that have come up. Could I ask you those before we move on?
Sure.
One is, does the liability insurance fall under other costs?
Cheryl, do you remember, did you answer that question last time?
I cannot remember.
Yeah, me neither. So I feel like this question came up last time and I do not know the answer to that off the top of my head. So why don't we go ahead and circle back to that? Here, I'll even make a note to myself to look it up.
No problem.
Yeah.
All right. And then you said, just for clarity on the EIDL, you said that you get the grant portion. It comes out of what you had for the PPP, but not if you got the loan portion.
Correct. That is correct.
That's
so if you got like $1,000 for one employee, all the way up to $10,000, only that portion is actually deducted from the forgiveness on your PPP.
Okay. And I have one more question. What is the period prior to COVID that the FTE is based on?
Okay, so I'll go over that in a couple of slides. There's two different time periods that you may look at. So I'll dig into that a little bit more detail in just a minute here.
Great. All right, let's keep going.
Cool.
And there you go.
Okay. So one thing that a lot of people were really worried about is the 60% being a cliff. So basically meaning if you didn't get to that full 60%, and just to make our numbers really easy, I like using $100,000. You know, if you didn't get to $60,000 in your payroll costs, are you suddenly going to have your whole loan not forgiven? And that was very worrisome to a lot of people, understandably so. So it is not, just rest assured. So I gave an example here just so you can kind of think through this. If you got a $100,000 loan and you only spent, say, $50,000 on payroll, your new forgivable amount would be that $50,000 divided by 0.6. So giving you your new full amount of $83,333. So essentially you could only spend an additional $33,333 on your other covered costs like rent and utilities. And you wouldn't want to spend the additional $16,667 of the original because that would not be forgivable. Now, if you end up not spending that, of course, that will turn into a loan, and that's what you would need to pay back. But the rest of it would be forgivable, that full $83,333. And if we could move to the next slide. So this is kind of going over the FTE. So being able to maintain your full-time equivalency. And to speak to that question that was just asked a minute ago here, we have two different options of time periods that you can compare your FTE to. So totally up to you to kind of think through strategically which of these two options makes the most sense for your business. The first one is January 1st through the end of February of this year, 2020. So basically the first 2 months of 2020, and that's a total of working hours of 344 hours. So how you kind of calculate your FTE, just so you can kind of think through this, is you take the total amount of hours available during that time period and divide it by how many were worked. So if you had one full-time employee, I'm making this extremely simple, they would work 344 hours of the 344 hours available. So that's assuming a 40-hour work week over those 2 months. Now, if you have a little bit more of a complicated kind of scenario, you might have one 15-hour employee, another 20-hour employee, and a third 30-hour. And out of all of their schedules over the time period, they maybe worked 599 hours. You divide that by the available hours to work and come to 344. So you would have that full-time equivalency of 1.74. Your other example here is you can use the time frame from February 15th through June 30th of 2019. So that's a much longer time period from last year. So kind of really depending on the fluctuations of your own business and kind of what seems to be the norm for you, looking at that time period. And I also gave the same sort of example of having either one full-time employee or having a 15, 20, and 30 hour. So let's go ahead and go to the next slide. Okay, so the next really exciting part about the Flexibility Act is that your covered period has been extended. It's used to be the 8 weeks from disbursement. So you got your money and you had 8 weeks to use up all of those funds. And now it has been extended to 24 weeks, which is fantastic. You know, it's almost half a year, so 6 months to be able to utilize those funds and still have them be fully forgivable. So it's really great if your business has been shut down. Maybe you got your funds back in, you know, April or even May, but you haven't really been able to get your business back up to normal running, operating. But now you are starting, you know, with the phases and starting to reopen and are able to use those funds much more liberally. You can go ahead and, yeah, it's great for you. You can still elect to use the 8-week covered period, but the default is 24 weeks now. So certain people might be like, you know, I really thought this through. I got this money in the beginning of, you know, mid-April. I used it up by mid-June, and go ahead, you can apply for forgiveness. So anytime you've used up all of the money, just go ahead and apply for the forgiveness. Now, you would be applying for this through your bank and through whoever it was that you originally got your PPP funds. So depending on kind of their own infrastructure, they might ask for certain time periods. But essentially the idea is as soon as you've used up all the money, then you can apply for that forgiveness. Now, in terms of the final parameter of when you must apply for forgiveness, the very last time that you can do that, otherwise it will turn into a loan, is 10 months after your 24-week covered period. So that could be way into 2021, possibly. So, you know, you might have your 6-month, your 24-week covered period expire in November or maybe even December if you got it, depending on when you got your funds dispersed. And then you've got, you know, all the way through until, you know, maybe August or September of next year. So pretty cool. All right, let's look at the next slide. The other big change was they changed the term of the loan. So let's say you did have some of your PPP end up being unforgivable. The term has changed from 2 years to being 5 years. Now, the big thing that it's kind of unfortunate, but just how they wrote the law was if you received your loan before the June 5th, excuse me, Flexibility Act was signed into law, then you will still have the 2-year term. Everything else about the loan will stay the same. But if you did receive your loan on June 5th or after June 5th, you will have the new 5-year term. So the interest rate is still going to be 1% for both scenarios. Your payments only start after you've applied for forgiveness. So as I said in the previous slide, it could be up to 10 months after your covered period. So that might be quite a while. But do remember that interest continues to accrue from the moment that those funds are dispersed. So from day one. So just keep that in mind. Go ahead and do next slide. Okay, so just a couple of resources. A lot of this information I find on the SBA.gov as well as Treasury.gov, and I did put in an actual link to the EZ 3508 application so you can kind of see what it is that they'll be sort of looking at. I think that this application will be applicable to a lot of people here on Vashon that are trying to wrap their minds around what information they're going to need to provide to get the forgiveness. And any questions that people might have for me, I'm happy to try to see if I have the answers.
So we've got a bunch,
Okay.
a whole bunch coming in, Heather. So first, can you just clarify what happens with businesses that use contractors? And can those funds be applied to paying for contractors?
So contractors, if you mean a 1099 contractor, those people are actually covered or eligible to apply for the PPP directly. So you would not be applying to pay them. They would be applying to pay themselves.
Great, I think that answers that question. Another question that came in, are the PPP funds taxable on your tax return?
No, they're not, which is really good.
Okay. And then another question that came in, are there caps on the amount per employee as well as a cap on what employers can pay themselves?
Yes, that is $100,000. So for your annual salary, they're not going to forgive anything that's over and above 100,000.
There you go. And there's actually a special calculation you have to do to pull out the amount over 100, right?
Yes, yes.
Form it helps you do that. Great. And I think we answered the question about what the time period was for the calculation on the FTE. If other people have questions, we'd be happy to answer them now. And these slides and the recording of this will be available on the chamber website on VashonChamber.com. Are there any other questions that people have? I'm certainly happy to answer them this morning. Okay, well, I think, Heather, this might be a record.
Wow.
For how quickly we got through it. I think the good news is that it's all good news for the loan because, quite frankly, they have made it easier for us to utilize the funds appropriately for our businesses and really keep our employees moving and our businesses moving. So I think it's really great that they made these adjustments. And I believe they also made another, they had another change yesterday that they came out with, that they're extending the time period for people to apply. Oh, we got some more questions that came in. Hold on. See, if I just talk long enough, we'll fill the space and we'll get more questions. So another question that came in: what type of documentation is required for the safe harbor?
Define what you mean by safe harbor.
Okay, I'll let Amy put that into the question for me. And then in the meantime, I'm going to ask the next question that Laurel has. Is the application deadline extended to August 8th for small businesses too?
The application deadline. So as far as I understand, there's no more applications for the PPP. The date was June 30th. So actually just a couple of days ago that the last applications were taken. Unless they have extended that, and I don't know. So this is part of our changing landscape that's always ever exciting, is that things are literally changing every seemingly day, week. So it is possible, if you heard something that I don't know about, that it was extended to August 8th, but last I checked, as of yesterday, it was June 30th.
And as we ask these questions, I'm going to check, because I thought I saw something in the Wall Street Journal this morning.
Oh, well, there you go.
Literally, it's hot off the press. Hard to keep track. All right. So the question, I think, just to clarify, what type of documentation is required for safe harbor? And I think Amy is tying that to reduction of FTE due to closing down.
Oh, what documentation? Okay, great question. Yeah, so that is something that they have not really been that clear on. So I actually was trying to dig down into, like, how are they going to be looking at, well, the safe harbor in terms of if you just had to shut down due to COVID, I think that's more going to be just a certification. But some of the rehire, like saying you laid off someone and then you re-offered them the job, but they turned it down, right? So just having some sort of letter from them saying, you know, we are not going to be going back to work at this time. Another example is of the documentation that they're asking for around these types of issues is if you were trying to hire, so maybe showing that you had a job posting, or, you know, that you posted something on like the chamber website, we can post job listings there, or if you put something up on Craigslist. So keeping track of those types of advertisements that you were trying to hire, but maybe not able to. But they have been a little bit vague about what that documentation is going to be exactly. So I would just say use your best judgment and instinct in terms of that.
Okay, great. Hopefully that helps Laurel answer that question. And then another question that came in is the amount for the monthly salary calculated by taxable income divided by 12. And this is specifically if you're a self-employed sole proprietor.
Wait, say that one more time.
It's the amount for monthly salary calculated by taxable income divided by 12.
Yeah, so for self-employed, what you're going to be looking at is your Schedule C and how much you paid yourself for 2019. So that's, and if you want to kind of drill down to details, I do recommend talking with a CPA, your tax account or your accountant, just to make sure that you're looking at the right line item and all that kind of stuff. But for self-employed, it should be pretty straightforward in terms of just looking at your 2019 tax returns, taking that amount, and then your monthly salary is divided by 12. Exactly.
Yeah. And Heather, there was a bill, the House did pass a bill last night.
Oh, perfect.
I don't know all of I read it this morning and I can't find it, but Laurel also confirmed that she saw it. So.
Okay, well, I'll look into that today.
You know, you got to stay on your toes with all these things.
I guess so, yeah.
Yeah. Well, if there are other questions, you can always reach out to Heather. She is an Ask the Expert, and her contact information is on the Vashon Chamber Ask the Expert site. And of course, you can also find her at the U.S. Bank a lot of times. If you work with U.S. Bank, that's a great place to be able to get those questions answered as well. So with that, if there are no more questions, I'm going to say thank you very much, Heather, for yet another. I think this is our third one on this topic. Another webinar to help the community understand how to deal with the changes that are coming through on the PPP. And it seems like it's all good and much easier for us to navigate.
Absolutely. My pleasure to be here.
All right. Well, everybody, it was a short one this morning, but I hope you got your answers, your questions answered. And we will have more of these in the future as we move forward for our chamber members and their business community. So stay tuned for alerts. And everybody, I hope everybody has a good day. And Elizabeth, we're going to follow up separately with you about the liability insurance being covered, okay? So everybody have a great day and stay healthy, okay? Bye-bye.
Bye.